Hi, my name is Moiz. I'm a PhD student at Imperial College. Thank you for your presentations. I had a question for Mr. Joseph here. You mentioned how you're providing digital identification to refugees and other vulnerable groups. I was wondering what sort of controls you have on like data access if it went to non-state actors who might use that data to target vulnerable groups, or even governments who might request you for that data to stop the free movement of refugees.
Very good question. There you go, Joe.
Thank you, that's a good question. So when we work with NGOs and aid organisations, we adhere to whatever standards that they're using. So as you can imagine, they're different in different locations. We don't want to hold any of the information at all. The only information that's held is the transaction ID, which is public to the blockchain anyway. But the actual details of where the beneficiary needs to register will be held by, say, the Red Cross or wherever whatever location that they are in. But we personally don't want to go near that minefield. Absolutely not.
Any other questions? Do put your hands up and I'll get around. There's a gentleman there in the blue shirt. If you could pass the microphone along, that'd be great.
Good afternoon. My name is Felix Kimaru. I come from Kenya, where Jamila comes from. I run an organization called Total Health. We use mobile phones to save lives of mothers and children. And I'm here because of the Africa Engineering Prize. We were part of the finalists. So my question is to Jamila. You've talked about 30,000 farmers. As Total Health, we talk about 26,000 farmers. M-Pesa has changed lives of many people. And it's very clear that the key for the problems that we face as Africa are innovations like these ones. So what do we do so that we can inspire more young people to be able to churn out solutions like these ones, even in the future?
Thank you, Felix, for the question. I think the need to change anything, whether it's beginning with yourself or with the world, is something that is deeply rooted. If you remember my story, I began by saying I wanted to become a doctor, totally based in my whole life, based on solving a problem for just one person. And for young children to take on the challenges that are facing their community, we need to prepare them at an early age, because once we grow up at 20 plus, it's hard to change somebody's perception. So it's upon us, and I think this is a responsibility more so for the parents, because you've been given a responsibility to bring up people who will make a difference in the world. So it starts at home. How are we going to inculcate or nurture the talents of the kids at home so that we understand what they want to be and make sure that they become, if they want to be social entrepreneurs, be social entrepreneurs. So it begins at home. And for me, it began because of the conditions where I grew up. I just wanted a better solution and a better world for myself. And so basically, it's a responsibility upon the people who are responsible for school-going children or at a young age. I'll give a quick example. The reason why I'm insisting on this point is because I work with young children, and what we are doing is we're trying to make them see that you cannot always be depending on somebody else. Under the care of a caring adult, you can be what you want to be in the future, and that's giving them total autonomy to become what they want to be. So that would be my quick answer, or a long one.
If I could just ask a quick question, just keep putting your hands up. But one of the things that was very interesting when the President Mauritius was speaking earlier was about the huge deficit in a lot of funding. There aren't a lot of universities in Africa that are up there in terms of laboratories or funding for specific projects. Given, especially Joe, your sort of project, how important is it to you that obviously a lot of the input is coming from sort of north to south in some ways? You're coming up with technologies to aid the poorest, but that there is still a lot of input from the south, because obviously the needs of a refugee in Syria or in Mozambique or in Pakistan is different. So it's just how much input is there from the ground up in these technologies and gearing it towards them as much as it is you coming up with these breakthroughs and adapting it. So I just want to know the sort of ideas flow.
Yeah. So every time we develop a product or a solution, we don't develop ourselves, in the sense that we get the end users to develop it for us. Right. So we have workshops in Berlin with refugees in Germany, or we will go to the Irish Red Cross and say, we have this idea, but we need to know the user experience, what it should be. So we try and get the end user to develop it for us, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I think that's the best approach that we'll use, because there's no point us developing something brilliant if it's not going to be used properly.
Dr. Shashi?
I'm a big believer in this notion that only Kenyans are going to solve Kenya's problems, and Indians are going to solve India's problems. But we're all global citizens, and as global citizens, we have both a right and a responsibility to work on these global problems. So it's being a realist. I mean, you have to go with where the solutions are. By the time a country like India, with all its engineering prowess, by the time we're able to match the R&D capabilities of the West, it'll take many, many years and a lot of money. And so, but we can't wait for that to happen. So we have to source the solutions from wherever they are.
Any more questions? We've got time for a little bit more. Anyone, any questions from the floor? The lady there, and then this gentleman here.
Hello, thank you for your presentations. My name's Martina Cheadle. I'm an engineering student at the University of Cambridge. And we've mentioned before that we possibly have a deficit of engineers, and certainly a deficit of engineers and scientists in government positions or advisors to governments. And I'd like to put it to all of you, how do you think we could encourage more engineers and scientists to be part of government bodies?
So Jamila, and then come round to Dr. Shashi.
Well, if I speak from the Kenyan perspective, is we have an education system that is very focused on academics, which is pass your exams and then you become whatever. So what happens is that we are mainly focused on making sure that you pass the test rather than making people interested in certain subjects. So one of the suggestions would be making education more interesting so that it more focuses on what people are interested in rather than what the government wants or what the general society wants. So if you fail, for example, in Kenya, if you fail in high school, that is it. If you're a practical person and you're doing a lot of things with your hands, and it happens in my family, by the way, very sharp person, electronic engineer, you could be an electronic engineer, but then if you fail the exam, you can't continue with anything else. So if we can release the pressure from passing exams and make it more practical, then that will encourage many young people to be engineers, hopefully.
From my point of view, studying my engineering degree, it was predominantly 90% males. And I think that's the way it's probably going to be if the system stays the way it is. But in Ireland, especially in Ireland, the last few years, there's a computer coding school. So I'm looking at this from a software point of view. There's a coding school that's called Coder Dojo that encourages kids to become programmers at a very young age. And we've had conversations with them, and the idea is to get a ratio of 50% boys and 50% girls in when they start to develop their cognitive thinking, that they can actually start engineering and developing in such a way. So I think that's probably the best way. I think going into the college, I think your mind's already made up what you're going to be. So I think it needs to start before that. And something else that may help us is hackathons. We have more awards for women than you do with guys, because it's just a guy fest, unfortunately.
I'll interpret your question as being, how do you get more engineers in government? I think scientists and engineers should get out of the lab and run for political office. Someone like you, I imagine, would make an excellent member of parliament. I hope you run someday.
Very good point. And one last question, this gentleman here.
Hi there, thank you very much for your presentations. My name is Andrew Lamb and I work on open data systems with the World Bank across Africa and also on distributed manufacturing with an organization called Field Ready in disaster zones. One of the things that struck me in comparing what you presented here with this morning's presentations is this morning's presentations might focus on technologies which are very centralized or kind of based on an industrial paradigm. The heritage of the engineering profession is kind of from the Industrial Revolution, and we have that kind of very centralized approach. In contrast, your innovations have been quite decentralized and sort of grassroots, bottom-based, bottom-up-based, grassroots-based types initiatives. So this idea of moving from a small number of big engineering challenges to a big number of small engineering challenges is really what I want to ask you about. What does scale mean to people like you?
There are two ways of looking at scale. And the model, I think, that will be the model of the future is replicability rather than growing one large thing into something larger. And we're seeing examples that mobile phones, solar technologies, and so on and so forth. This idea of distributed generation of whatever the resources is probably the way to go.
For me, the idea of scale is getting as many users, and I don't mean that from a commercial point of view, I mean as many users as possible, end users on the ground, and that's only going to be achieved through partnerships. Because working with NGOs and aid organizations, it's about a reputation. I don't think we could not go and give the solution to the world any other way. It just wouldn't work. We'd be wasting our time. So.
In terms of numbers, when we talk about scale for farming industry, it's the whole world basically, because we all rely on food. I know it's scary if you look at it, because we're talking about almost close to 500 million smallholder farmers in the developing countries who are being neglected either by government or development agencies, because most of the times the solution is coming from either the World Bank itself or somebody else who has the money. The solutions are not coming from the people who are living in it, and seeing the farmers give up on farming or closing down their farms. So when we talk about scale, I would rather say, just think about it. If the farmers go on strike today, are you going to eat? So in terms of scale, it's that scary.
Great, thank you very much indeed to our panelists, to Jamila Abbas and to Dr. Shashi Bulaswar, and of course to Joseph Thompson for a really interesting and enlightening discussion.